Welcome back to the Self Revolution podcast. Today, I'm sharing how meditation has fundamentally transformed my life. I'm also so excited to share that I'm launching a meditation method through the Anya Institute called the Anya Meditation Method that will be available very shortly, and the waitlist is in the description of today's episode. Today, we're going to dive into my story and journey with meditation, why I started meditating in the first place, some of the experiences I've had meditating, how meditation has transformed not only my internal world, but my external world, why now I am completely hooked. I've been meditating almost every day for the past 3.5 years, and why ultimately I have now decided to bring this to all of you through the Anya Meditation Method. Meditation today has many different meanings associated with it. When I'm talking about meditation today, I'm primarily talking about the practice of meditation. I really view meditation as ultimately a state of awareness. And if you tune in to our previous episode around meditation in season 1, I dive into much more of the history around meditation from a yogic and Vedic viewpoint, where my study has primarily come from. But today I'm going to be talking about just the practice of meditation and my journey with a primarily seated practice of meditation, and ultimately how that practice has transformed my mind to begin living in more of this state of meditation. I was first introduced to yoga as a teenager and had some experiences meditating in yoga classes when I was in college, but I was primarily really introduced to meditation when I was 22 years old in my first yoga teacher training. And most yoga teacher trainings don't often go into the depths of meditation. And mine didn't really go into it that much as well, but it introduced me to some of these ancient texts, primarily Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, that really provide a blueprint around how to meditate. And so I was 22 years old. I had just left college. I had moved up to Boston. I had gone through a breakup, and this was the first time that I was single and living on my own in my entire life. And when I, reflect back on this time, I was pretty lost. Like, I was experiencing a range of emotions. I didn't really have a core sense of who I was as a human being. I was trying to process a lot of the things that had happened, in my life and throughout college. And I was trying to find a sense of direction, right? Like, where was I going to go and what was I going to do? And I was also trying to make peace with being alone for the first time in pretty much my entire life. I had always lived with roommates or with my family or had a partner. And this was my first experience of feeling quote unquote lonely, right? Just like being by myself. And a couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to go back to this little apartment in Boston where this all really began. And it was so emotional for me. Like, I walked up to this apartment and broke down in tears because of the impact that this time of my life really had on me, and how really I had chose at that young age in this studio, in this little apartment, to start to get quiet with myself and embrace that stillness and silence instead of run away from it. I was in this little 400 square foot apartment in Back Bay in Boston, and it was just like a one room studio. So there wasn't much space for anything. And I set up a little spot in my apartment where I laid down a yoga mat, and I began committing to a daily practice. And this was inspired by, again, my yoga teacher training and what I was reading about the possibility of what could be. In so many of these ancient texts, there's talk of being able to come to a state within your own mind and awareness where you are sitting in more of a place of stillness and quiet. And at that time, I could not imagine my mind not being just like this bundle of chaos and thoughts, and being able to actually experience this state of like innate joy, innate bliss, innate peace. And at that time, I had no idea like what that would feel like or what it could feel like. but I was inspired and I wanted to see if I could bring myself to that place through this practice. So I began sitting with myself in this little apartment, and I didn't really have any idea what I was doing at the time. Like I said, there had been some guided meditations and I played around with that a little bit, but then I really just started sitting in silence with myself, focusing on my breath and trying to do the practices that were laid out in the Yoga Sutras. And day after day, I would sit. And at first, this was an incredibly uncomfortable experience. My mind was incredibly busy. I was trying to process everything that was happening. I would sit down and most days be overwhelmed by emotions and by thoughts and by stress. It wasn't a pleasant experience for me. I would cry or I would get overwhelmed and have to stop. But I was committed to trying, and I came back day after day after day, and slowly but surely, my experience started to evolve. I started to be able to see these little glimpses of space between my thoughts, of touching this aspect of reality that wasn't just filled with chaos and confusion. I started to feel this innate sense of love and of peace. And at first, those little moments were very small, right? That it wasn't my entire meditative experience. I often felt like throughout that time I was fighting with myself, but I started to feel those little micro moments where I knew I was touching some aspect of myself, of my mind that was deeper than the reality that I had been experiencing on a day-to-day basis. During this time, I also started to shift some of my behaviors. I previously had been drinking and partying and was out almost every night. I started to see how even through my meditation, I wanted to start to shift some of my habits. I stopped drinking quite as much. I was a little bit more conscious of my behavior. And so I started to notice how there was this relationship between how I was able to really sit and tune into myself and the actions that I was actually taking in the external world. So while I started to notice these little shifts, it took time. And it took me well over a month before I really began to be able to touch this aspect of my own inner reality that was much different than I had experienced before. And as I continued to stay with this practice, that experience of being able to touch something deeper than myself, getting into a true meditative state, began to expand. And I began to have all of these insights and ideas, and I truly began to transform from the inside out. Friends and family members began to reflect to me that I was happier, that I was more joyful than I had ever been in my entire life. And I freaking felt that. By the end of my yoga teacher training in May, I was on fire. My heart was on fire. I was radiating. And that was something that I had really lost. I had lost touch with my innate spark. I had never really fully tapped into my potential as a human being. And this sense of joy was something that was a different type of joy that I had experienced before. I remember writing in my journal different ideas around impermanence and not being able to control things in my external environment. And it was around this time that I started writing and having ideas. I actually came up and bought the domain, The Real Fucking You, which was an inspiration for this podcast years and years later, because I wanted to share with others what I was experiencing. It was this waking the fuck up to who I really was as a human being and losing and letting go of all of this external shit that was keeping me small, that was having me doubt myself. And instead, I was able to tap into this innate confidence and this sense of center of who I really was. So those months were honestly some of the happiest of my life. And I get emotional even talking about it because it was so incredibly transformative for me. I had never experienced that before. And having like grown up in an environment and in college and in, the corporate world where there was so much pressure around performance and around doing the right thing, I hadn't really experienced that sense of being able to really ask myself what I wanted in my life. What did I want to do? What did I want to create? And this practice of meditation, of getting in touch with myself, allowed me to do just that. I continued meditating every day, pretty much every day, for the rest of this year. And I was really tapping in to this state of trusting my own intuition and playing with that, being able to create from a state of meditation, also process my emotions from a state of meditation, and really listen to what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go from that state. I had been single for a year at this point, and this was the first time I had been single for many years. I was in a relationship all throughout college. And it was around this point, it was in September, that I started to feel ready to potentially open myself up to a relationship again. And it was right before Labor Day weekend. I had a ping to go down to Atlanta, Georgia for a football game. UNC, where I went to college, was playing in a bowl. And I'm not a huge football fan, but I thought it would be fun. And my college roommate happened to live down there. And so I decided to book a trip. And I remember telling one of my best friends before I went on this trip that I was going to fall in love this weekend. And it's just like what I had felt. It's what had come up through meditation. I had felt this innate sensation inside of my body that that was what was present for me. So I went to Atlanta that weekend, and I was staying with my roommate from college. And I woke up on Saturday morning in my PJs. I was sitting on her bed, and this man walked into the doorway and asked if we wanted anything from Chick-fil-A. And I think my eyes immediately lit up, and I had this internal sensation that this was it. I was in love. And people joke about love at first sight, and I can't tell you whether I believe in it or not, but I guess it is what happened to me. And we spent the rest of that day and evening together, and I told him that I loved him that night. Crazy woman, the first night we met. And it was in that moment where I just was in full surrender and trusted myself, and even had the confidence to tell him that I loved him the night that I met, and had no inhibition of being the crazy girl or having those thoughts run through my head around, is this real? I felt so in tune and locked in with who I was and what I knew to be true. I was not afraid to speak my truth. And to me, that was only possible through meditation. And also being able to just be in this magnetic state of radiating my inner truth. And I think that is why he didn't run away from me or think that I was absolutely crazy, is because I actually meant it. I actually felt that way. And so we did 8 months of long distance, and I moved out to LA shortly after that. And the rest is history. That is our story. And our story comes from my perspective, right? The depths of meditation for me and being able to really trust yourself. So I'm not pretending to say that, if you meditate, you are going to randomly stumble on the person that you're going to fall in love with. Maybe that happens to you. But really what I'm saying is that meditation is a process, right? It is a practice that allows you to tap in really, really deeply to your own inner knowing, your own sense of self, so that you know what is true for you. If you're in a relationship and you're questioning whether it's the right path that you want to go down, is this the right person for me? Meditation is a practice that allows you to hone the discernment of what is true and what is not true. And ever since that moment, really throughout the rest of my life, although there have been starts and stops, which I'll talk about in just a moment, I've been able to come back to the practice of meditation to help me decide what is true for me and what is not. I think like many people, and if you have tried meditation, maybe this has been your experience, that it can be hard to stick with the practice, right? It can be hard to find 20, 30 minutes in your day to sit down and be in quiet because we live in a really, really busy society. And this is exactly what happened to me. Like I was in a full state of bliss. I absolutely was in a meditative state. In many instances, I was living in a state of meditation. But shortly, not too shortly after, but a few months after I, met Michael and started thinking about my future and what I was going to do next, I began to lose my meditation practice. I moved out to LA. There was a lot of change in my life. And instead of staying consistent and sticking with what had created so much abundance in my life, I began to lose the practice. So I came to LA. I started working in private equity. Things got really busy again. I was very stressed. And I fell back into the cycle that I had been in before. And a year after working at that private equity firm, I was completely miserable. Like I was overwhelmed with my emotions again. I had just like, my mind was a ball of chaos. And I was left sitting and wondering like, what the freak had happened? Like, what did I had like let happen? I was in such a magnetic state. I was in this deep state of consciousness. I couldn't really articulate that at the time. And I had let myself fall back into a place that I wasn't so satisfied with. This really began my multi-year journey of the back and forth of diving deep into my practice and then losing it again and not fully integrating it into my life. After I left this private equity firm, I took my first solo trip to Costa Rica. And I dove back into my yoga practice. I reconnected with the practice of meditation. I brought that back into my day-to-day life, but it didn't last all that long. I wasn't really committed to the practice fully. And again, years went by. I would flip-flop. I would experience it here or there. And then I started Raewear and my first company, and I was in a creative flow. And some parts of Raewear were created from a meditative state, but a lot of Raewear was created from what I'd call my outer mind. And when things turned a little bit more south with Raewear, again, I found myself in this state of like full overwhelm. Not being sure what to do, not being able to really understand why things had happened or why I made decisions that I did. And again, I felt that deep sense of disconnection. And it was in this moment that I committed to myself that I was never going to allow myself to get to this place again. I was so tired of the yo-yo of going back and forth and experiencing fits and starts of this, but not truly committing and listening and living a life that was in full alignment with who I knew I was and my full potential. And so in that moment, I really began my own meditation practice again. And this started in our apartment downtown LA. I bought a meditation cushion. I made a space in our apartment and I committed to a morning practice again. And I remember just sitting there feeling what I had felt when I started meditation at the very beginning of this journey. This was around 6 years later, and I found myself sitting in this place exactly where I had been, right? In this state of just overwhelm with my mind, of not being able to sift through. I just see this like big ball of like yarn of mess and confusion. That's how I view my mind when it was in states like that. And I had to start the process of unwinding again. But what was beautiful about this time is I knew what was possible, right? I had touched that state of true meditation, dhyana, and samadhi, that I knew I could bring myself through the practice of meditation back to that state of living in meditation. And so I started the hard practice of doing it again and again and again, and of waking up every morning and then sitting on my meditation cushion and being devoted to the practice. And once again, I used many of the similar tools that I did the first time around to bring myself back into this state, to begin to evolve my own mind. That December, I went back to Costa Rica. And at this point, I had been meditating for many months, and I had began to once again really experience and be able to drop into a deeper state of meditation, of true meditation. And I was in Costa Rica, and I again just had this like really profound experience of being able to meditate for hours on end. I was sitting on the beach one day and had a really transformative experience, which maybe I'll share more about at another time. But it really was this moment of awakening, of being able to open my eyes and see the world from a completely new lens, of being able to really look at the earth and the sand and the trees as like part of me, right? And really deeply connecting with the oneness of reality, which is our true nature. I came back from this trip and felt fully just devoted to following my truth and my path again, very similar to what I had felt back years ago when I took my first yoga teacher training. I was on fire. I was ready to just bring my full freaking self to the world. And I'm happy to say that really from that point to where I am today has been about 3.5 years. I've done that. I've meditated almost every single day. I've been fully devoted and committed to my practice. And it has not been a smooth journey still. There's been many ups and downs, but meditation has become a fundamental system in my life. This practice of meditation, if you don't keep up with the practice of meditation, right, it can easily slip away. We can get caught up in other aspects of life, which I experienced in my own story. But also when you are consistently devoted to the practice, you begin to live your life in a state of meditation. And that has been really my story and my journey, right? I have not learned meditation in a traditional sense from a lineage or gone to a lot of long meditation, immersive experiences. I have lived meditation. I have taught myself in many ways how to meditate with the guidance of ancient texts and with the guidance of mentors and teachers along the way. And I truly believe that this practice can help anyone and everyone, because at the essence, it connects you back with your own truth of who you are as a human being. For me, it has fundamentally transformed every single aspect of my life, my relationship with myself, my health and vitality. I mean, I look different than I did many years ago. I look much more healthy and vital and alive. And those are because of choices that have ultimately stemmed from being in a state of deep connection with myself. It's transformed my relationships, not only brought my partner into my life, but also helped us navigate some of the most challenging times and helped me navigate some of the most challenging times that we've had in our own relationship. It has absolutely transformed my career and in many ways now becoming my career. And it's also allowed me to just experience more pleasure and joy and freaking fun in life, right? Life is meant to be lived. And meditation allows you to embody the full essence of life and allows you to embody your full potential as a human being. I hope this inspires you to consider walking down the path of meditation. And I'm going to share more next week about the depths of the Anya Meditation Method and what makes it different and unique, and why I really created this method that helps blend more of the traditional approaches to meditation with a very integrated way of living meditation in your day to day and helping you actually create from a state of meditation, not only come to a place of stillness within yourself. So tune in to next week's episode for more. Sign up for the waitlist if this is appealing to you. And at the end of the day, I hope that you got a taste from my own experience of what it can be and feel like to really connect with the depths of who you are, experience your own self-revolution and ultimately evolution. So with that, thank you.